So today's discussion is about conclusions. What are the guidelines in writing the conclusions? So the following should be the characteristics of conclusion. First, conclusions are inferences, deductions, abstractions, implications, interpretations, general statements, and or generalizations based upon the findings. Conclusions are the logical and valid outgrowth of the findings. They should not contain any numeral because numerals generally limit the forceful effect or impact and scope of a generalization. No conclusions should be made that are not based upon the findings. Next, we also have conclusions should appropriately answer the specific questions raised at the beginning of the investigation. You need to make sure, however, that in answering the specific questions, they should be in the order they are given under the statement of the problem. So if you have research question number 1 in the conclusion, it should be the first one to be answered. The study becomes almost meaningless if the questions raised are not properly answered by the conclusions. So all of those questions at the beginning of the investigation should be answered in your conclusion. Next, we have conclusions. Conclusions should point out what were factually learned from the inquiry. However, no conclusions should be drawn from the implied or indirect effects of the findings. Next, conclusions should be formulated concisely. So when you say concisely, that is brief and short, yet they convey all the necessary information resulting from the study as required by the specific questions. Without any strong evidence to the contrary, conclusions should be stated categorically. They should be worded as if they are 100% true and correct. They should not give any hint that the researcher has some doubts about their validity and reliability. The use of qualifiers such as probably, perhaps, maybe, and the like should be avoided as much as possible. Next characteristic, conclusions should refer only to the population, area, and subject of the study. Take for instance the hypothetical teaching of science in the high schools of Province A. All conclusions about the faculty, facilities, methods, problems, etc. refer only to the teaching of science in the high schools of Province A. Lastly, conclusions should not be repetitions of any statements anywhere in the sentence. There may be recapitulations if necessary, but they should be worded differently and they should convey the same information as the statements recapitulated. Okay, so if we have those characteristics that you need to consider in writing your conclusions, we also have some dangers to avoid in drawing up conclusions based on quantitative data rather. Okay, so you have bias, incorrect generalization, incorrect deduction, incorrect comparison, abuse of correlation data, limited information furnished by any one ratio, misleading impression concerning magnitude of base variable. Okay. Let's discuss first bias. Business establishments, agencies, or organizations usually present or manipulate figures to their favor. For instance, an advertisement may quote statistics to show that a given product is superior to any other leading brand. We should be wary of the use of statistics in this case because of the obvious profit motive behind. An individual may also do the same. A respondent to a questionnaire or in any interview may commit the same bias to protect his own interests. Like the case of the science teachers in the high schools of Province A, they may respond that the science facilities in their respective schools are adequate, although they are not adequate just to protect the good names of their own schools. A respondent, if asked how many science books he has read, may say that he has read many, although he has read only a few to protect his name. Hence, if there is a way of checking the veracity of presented data by investigation, observation, or otherwise, this should be done to ensure the accuracy of the conclusion based upon the data under consideration. Next, incorrect generalization. An incorrect generalization is made when there is a limited body of information or when the sample is not representative of the population. Let's have this as an example. The Alumni Association of a big university would like to conduct a survey to determine the average income of the alumni during their first 10 years after graduation. Though the total number of returns may meet the sample size requirement, the population may not be properly represented by the actual composition of the sample. This is likely to happen because chances are that a great majority of the alumni in the high income bracket will respond readily, but the great majority of those who are not doing well may ignore the survey by reason of pride. In such a case, the high income group is overrepresented and low income group is underrepresented in the sample, resulting in the overestimate of the average income of the entire alumni group. This is the result of a built-in sampling bias. Incorrect deduction. This happens when a general rule is applied to a specific case. Suppose there is a finding that the science facilities in the high schools of Province A are inadequate. We cannot conclude at once that any particular tool or equipment is definitely inadequate. Suppose there is an oversupply of test tubes. Hence, to make the conclusion that all science equipment and tools in the high schools of Province A are inadequate is an incorrect deduction in this case. Fourth, incorrect comparison. A basic error in statistical work is to compare two things that are not really comparable. Again, let us go to the high schools of Province A. Suppose in the survey, School C has been found to have 20 microscopes and School D has only 8. We may conclude immediately that School C is better equipped with microscopes than School D. However, upon further inquiry, School C has 1,500 students, while School D has only 500 students. Hence, the ratio in School C is 75 students is to 1 microscope, while in School D, the ratio is 63 students to 1 microscope. Hence, School D is better equipped with microscopes than School C. To conclude that School C is better equipped with microscopes than School D based on the number of microscopes owned by each school is incorrect comparison. Abuse of correlation data. A correlation study may show a high degree of association between two variables. They may move in the same direction at the same rate, but it is not right to conclude at once that one is the cause of the other unless confirmed so by other studies. In no case does correlation show causal relationship. When the government increases the price of gasoline, the prices of commodities also start to rise. We cannot conclude immediately that the increase in price of gasoline is the sole cause of the increase in the prices of commodities. There are other causes to be considered, such as shortage or undersupply of the commodities, increased cost of production, panic buying, etc. To be able to make a conclusive statement as to what is or what are the real causes of the increases in prices of commodities, an intensive investigation is needed. Next, we have limited information furnished by any one ratio. A ratio shows only a partial picture in most analytical work. Suppose the only information that we have about a certain establishment is that the ratio does not show the kinds of employees living and why they are living. We do not know whether the losses of the employees are caused by death, retirement, resignations, or dismissals. We can only surmise, but we cannot conclude with definiteness that the causes of the 20% employee turnover are death, retirement, poor working conditions, poor salary, etc. Avoid as much as possible making conclusions not sufficiently and adequately supported by facts. Lastly, we have misleading impression concerning magnitude of base variable. Ratios can give erroneous impressions when they are used to express relationships between two variables of small magnitudes. Take the following examples. A college announced that 75% of its graduates passed the CPA examination at a certain time. Another college also advertised that 100% of its graduates who took the same examination passed. From these announcements, we may form the impression that the standard of instruction in the two colleges is high. Actually, only 4 graduates from the first college took the CPA licensing examination and 3 happened to pass. In the second college, only 1 of its graduates took the same examination and he happened to pass. To avoid making false impressions by making conclusions using ratios concerning variables of very small magnitudes, use the original data because the relationship is clear even without the use of a ratio. Of the first college, we may say that 3 out of the 4 graduates who took the CPA test passed. And of the second college, we may say that the 1 graduate who took the same test passed. Part of Chapter 5 is also recommendations. Like conclusions, we also have some guidelines in writing the recommendations. Recommendations are appeals to people or entities concerned to solve or help solve the problems discovered in the inquiry. So they should have the following characteristics. So as mentioned before, recommendations should aim to solve or help solve problems discovered in the investigation. For instance, one problem discovered in the inquiry about the teaching of science in the high schools of Province A is the lack of adequate facilities. Hence, the recommendation is for the schools to acquire more facilities. Surely this will solve or help solve the problem of lack of adequate facilities. Second, no recommendations should be made for a problem or anything for that matter that has not been discovered or discussed in the study. Recommendations for things not discussed in the study are irrelevant. The third one, there may also be recommendations for the continuance of a good practice or system, or even recommendation for its improvement. This is to ensure a continuous benefit being accorded to the universe involved. The fourth one, recommendations should aim for the ideal, but they must be feasible, practical, and attainable. It is useless to recommend the impossible. This, of course, depends upon the situation. For a big university of 10,000 students, it would be easy to recommend the purchase of a generator as a safeguard against brownouts. But for a small private school of only 200 students, this may not be feasible. Recommendations should be logical and valid. If the problem is the lack of facilities, it is only logical to recommend the acquisition of the lacking facilities. Recommendations should be addressed to the persons, entities, agencies, or offices who or which are in a position to implement them. Example, suppose one problem discovered is the lack of science facilities. The recommendation should be the school principals should make an urgent petition to the proper government authorities to purchase adequate science equipment for the high schools. For private schools, the petition should be directed to the respective board of trustees. Lastly, there should be a recommendation for further research on the same topic in other places to verify, amplify, or negate the findings of the study. This is necessary so that if the findings are the same, generalizations of wider application can be formulated. For recommending similar researches to be conducted, the recommendation should be, it is recommended that similar researches should be conducted in other places. Other provinces should also make inquiries into the status of the teaching of science in their own high schools, so that if similar problems and deficiencies are found, concerted efforts may be exerted to improve science teaching in all high schools in the country. So that would be all for our discussion. I'll see you next week.